Snapping out of a daydream of a warm, lush field, Thor finds himself surrounded by corpses. It's the Battle of Jörungavágr, 987 AD. Multiple longships battle on the raging sea. Thor and his comrade Thorkel brutally cut down countless enemy forces. Thor tells Thorkel he's going ahead to stop the enemy, slaughtering everyone that comes his way. Suddenly, he gets distracted. An arrow hits his shoulder. He wrestles a soldier. Both fall into the sea. Grabbing the man's sword from its hilt, Thor makes quick work of him. Now, having second thoughts, Thor drops the sword. It sinks to the bottom of the sea as he swims towards land, leaving the battle without turning back. In Iceland, 15 years later in 1002 AD, a young boy, Thorfinn, and his sister Ylva, Thor's children, go about their daily chores. That night, Leif Erikson tells a group of children the story of how he sailed to the new continent, claiming it was warmer and more fertile, a land without war or slaves. They even make friends with the natives, receiving a headdress and a tobacco pipe as gifts. He names the new continent Vinland. That night, a frail-looking man with a collar and a broken chain trudges through the snow towards the village. While shoveling snow with her father the next morning, Ilda falls off the roof. She uncovers something buried by their front door, the man with the collar. Leif warns Thorfinn about how dangerous the sea is. His ship once got stuck in an ice floe, but the ship wasn't the only thing he left behind. The whole crew perished while walking across the frozen water. Leif goes on to tell the story of how their ancestors fled King Harald after his conquest of Norway. Thorfinn refuses to believe his ancestors would run away. Rushing to ask his father about Leif's story, he finds Thor reviving the escaped slave. Suddenly, someone bursts through the door, explaining that Halfdan has shown up at their port, looking for an escaped slave. Barging into their home, Halfdan demands Thor return the slave, to which Thor offers to buy him instead, for 4 times the amount he paid. Despite their best efforts, the slave dies. A warship sails towards the town. Thor hasn't completely let go of his past, as his equipment still sits in a chest hidden in the family's home. A Viking settlement in Northumbria, England, is attacked on November 13, 1002 AD. The English strike while they bathe, slaughtering them, sparing no one, not even the women and children. Back in Iceland, the children of the village battle with wooden weapons. Leif shows up to tell Thorfinn, who died early on during the game, that he's leaving to trade in Norway. Looking towards the horizon, Leif notices a warship approaching the village, telling Thorfinn to warn his father. They request to speak with Thor the Troll. Making his way to the dock, Thor addresses the soldiers as Vikings and asks for their leader Floki. Apparently, King Sweyn's sister was one of the victims, giving him a good excuse to wage war on England. Despite being a deserter, the leader of the Vikings, Sigvaldi, is willing to forgive Thor if he returns to Jomsborg and fights in the war. If Thor refuses, however, he's forcing his hand because he jeopardizes the entire village's safety. Some of the children eavesdrop, and the older boys in the village become excited for their first chance to fight on the battlefield. Leif tells the kids that the Vikings are the strongest army in the north. Returning to his ship, Floki introduces himself to the village, explaining that his task is to recruit the hero Thor Snorreson and anyone who chooses to follow him into battle. They will send a warship for Thor to command in the coming weeks. Despite feigning his own death, he wasn't able to escape after 15 years on the run. Thorfinn beats up the village kids, injuring them while they play war. Angry that he can't sail with the others, he discards his wooden sword to look for a real blade. Finding the chest with Thor's old gear in it, Thorfinn, mesmerized by his old dagger, doesn't notice his father until Thor grabs it by the blade. Thor explains that swords are for killing people. Asking his son who he was going to kill, Thorfinn replies that he was going to kill the enemy. Thor tells him that he doesn't have any enemies, that no one has enemies. Thorfinn runs out of the house, calling his father a liar. Floki and his troop of Vikings visit the Faroe Islands to speak with Askeladd, the leader of a group of Vikings, pirates. Floki offers 5 pounds of gold. All Askeladd and his men have to do is kill Thor. Askeladd wonders why Floki doesn't kill him himself, asking for double what Floki offers. Floki tries to intimidate him, claiming Askeladd is in no position to negotiate. A spear flies into the tent, killing the Viking hiding behind the tapestry. Taken by surprise, Floki accepts his counteroffer. Thors decides to take only 5 of the young men from their village on their journey with him and Leif. One of the young women sending them off worries about Ari, until Leif explains that they won't even see a battlefield. He plans to bring them back to the village after he finishes trading in Norway. Thors says goodbye to his family, but can't find Thorfinn. He begins to tell Helga something, but can't find the words. They both understand, but leave it unspoken. Using a giant-sized oar, Thors takes one side of the ship, while the 5 young men row on the other, barely able to keep up. Once they are far enough to use the sails, Thors agrees that it's too late to turn back now. It takes a second before realizing that Thorfinn was the one who asked the question. Thors is not happy, but can't help but smile when Thorfinn jumps out of a barrel to relieve himself, struck by the beauty of the ocean. In the Faroe Islands, Askeladd and his crew prepare for the job, reasoning that Floki is hiding something. This isn't an execution, it's an assassination. That night, Leif tells them to change course, noticing the wind change. Thors tells Ari, a young suitor with a crush on Ylva, eager to become a warrior, about his daughter. Thors tells him about her birth, while he was still a Viking, and how it made him fear battle. Now that he had something to live for, he decided to leave the battlefield forever. The crew makes it to the Faroe Islands to stop, rest, and resupply. As they sail through a narrow pass with cliffs on either side, both Leif and Thors get a bad feeling. They decide to turn back. Before they make it out, rubble and broken beams careen off the side of the cliff, where Askeladd's men lie in wait. They're trapped. Knowing they're no match for 2 ships full of men, Thors sighs and retrieves his sword from the chest. He hands Thorfinn his dagger, telling him to only use it to defend himself. With that, Thors leaps onto one of their ships and starts knocking men out left and right without even drawing his sword. Thors continues to effortlessly beat members of Askeladd's crew with his bare hands. Even Bjorn, second in command, who's in a blind rage after consuming a berserker mushroom, doesn't stand a chance. The other ship attempts to board Thors when Bjorn's unconscious body flies towards them, breaking one of the gangplanks, quickly followed by Thors jumping back to his ship. Drawing his sword, destroying the other gangplank, he threatens the entire crew. They either give up and leave, or they all die. To protect the kids, Thors identifies the leader, Askeladd, challenging him to a duel. If he wins, they leave him alone. If Askeladd can beat him, he can take what he wants. He accepts. But before they start, Thorfinn throws a tantrum, revealing his identity as Thor's son. Askeladd cuts the rope on the mast, dropping the sail as a distraction to get a surprise attack. Too shallow, the cut barely scratches Thor's. Askeladd is able to block his attacks. Noticing his sword is in bad shape, thinking Thor's is trying to destroy it, he tries to break Thor's sword first, but it's all going according to plan. Thor's sword breaks and Askeladd swings wide, finding himself disarmed with his own sword at his neck, falling for Thor's trap. Askeladd asks why he wasted his talents as a master warrior for 15 years, to which Thors explains he isn't a true master because a true warrior doesn't need a sword. When Askeladd asks him to become the leader of his group, no one laughs when he says he was joking. When Bjorn wakes up and screams, this isn't the time to be joking around, suddenly jumping onto Thor's ship, taking Thorfinn hostage. Askeladd refuses to honor the duel despite losing, and Thors refuses to kill him. But as soon as Askeladd looks like he'll do the honorable thing, he signals for his archers on the cliff to fire, littering Thor's body with arrows. Without flinching, Thors calmly asks Askeladd to honor his promise, and tells Leif to bring his head to the leader of the Vikings, then turns to Bjorn, demanding that he release his son. Askeladd is surprised to find that none of his crew died. They take one of their ships, but they notice Thorfinn stowed away on it. Screaming and cursing them, he vows to kill Askeladd and avenge his father. The pirates become restless while sailing to the meeting place to receive payment for Thor's assassination. Assuming Thorfinn died from thirst or starvation, they don't bother to check on him. Upon leaving the boat, Thorfinn witnesses the pirates raid a village, leaving no one alive. He sneaks into Askeladd's room, but is unable to kill the man in his sleep, saying he would never do something so cowardly. So the next day, he challenges Askeladd to a duel instead. A kick to the stomach resulted in an almost instant loss. Starving and alone, Thorfinn attempts to survive in the wild, growing weaker by the day. Back in Iceland, Leif returns with Thor's chest, with all his belongings intact. Well, almost. The sword remains in two pieces, the blade separated from the hilt. Leif swears he will find Thorfinn regardless of how many years it may take. Ylva refuses to show her grief, distracting herself with chores and work until Hilda tells her it's enough. She needs to rest and can't hide from her feelings forever. Hilda breaks down in her mother's arms. Thorfinn continues surviving in the woods, practicing using a sword, obsessed with revenge. One night, while scraping marrow out of bones, a wolf appears. Thorfinn hears the advice Askeladd gave him echoing in his head. Don't let the sword swing him around. He pulls out his father's dagger and kills the wolf as it lunges at him. Trying to hunt rabbits, Thorfinn realizes he can throw the knife instead of trying to catch them hunting on foot. As the pirates get ready to sail, Thorfinn appears out of the woods, challenging Askeladd to another duel. Thorfinn is promised his duel if he can achieve something on the battlefield. He ends up joining the pirates on their voyage. The Vikings were seafaring pirates and raiders, but after the English attacked Viking settlers in 1002 AD, they were hired to help the Danish army invade England. Askeladd and his Vikings, with Thorfinn in tow, arrive in the vicinity of Gainsborough, near the center of England, to find the remnants of a battle. Seeing so many bodies, along with the stench of the rotting corpses, causes Thorfinn to lose his stomach. Askeladd and Bjorn speak with a Danish soldier about a job, coming to an agreement for the 5 pounds of gold. As soon as the deal is done, an arrow pierces the soldier's neck from behind. They're surrounded. Thorfinn is taken by surprise as a soldier tackles him to the ground, only to be saved by Askeladd, who tells him the weak die first on the battlefield. Thorfinn goes into a rage and kills his first man. After that, he joins the Vikings, becoming more and more adept with his knife as the years pass. He begins to dual-wield daggers as his weapons of choice. On a scouting mission, he becomes injured and is found by an older Englishwoman and her daughter, who take him in. He reluctantly accepts their generosity. A soldier comes looking for a kid pirate, becoming suspicious after seeing Thorfinn. The older woman covers for him. Picking up a log from the fire, Thorfinn tells them both to run. Lighting a building on fire to signal the Vikings, the older woman follows him. Feeling guilty upon seeing her disappointment, he tries to save the villagers, telling them to run. He has a flashback to when his family was together, but there was nothing he could do. King Sweyn orders his troops to retreat and rest for the winter. Without steady work, Askeladd and his Vikings travel to France near the Loire River, where 2 clans are at war. One lays siege to a fort that backs up onto a river, but they cannot take the fort by attacking the front gate alone. Askeladd sends Thorfinn to send a message to the attacking army, offering to help take the fort for half the spoils. Still bent on revenge, Askeladd promises Thorfinn a duel if he can bring him a head with a helmet. Thorfinn seals the deal with the army and sends the signal. The next day, the army's leaders think Thorfinn lied, until the Vikings show up, carrying their longships across land, avoiding the waterfall upstream. Thorfinn notices the fort's leader, a head with a helmet. Jumping across the moat, he cuts down the soldiers on the ramparts, cutting off the commander's head with one strike. He dives into the moat after the head as it falls off the ramparts. The army finally breaks down the front gate, only to find all the soldiers in the fort already dead. The treasure store is completely empty. The Vikings sail away laughing, until a head is thrown on board, with Thorfinn close behind. He challenges Askeladd, but the duel will have to wait. First, they have to escape the Franks. The Vikings return to their village with enough loot to last through the winter. Thorfinn finally has another chance to duel with Askeladd. Thorfinn goes on the offensive and quickly attacks, while Askeladd tries to casually make small talk. Bjorn is impressed by his improvement over the past few years. Thorfinn barely misses his chance, but Askeladd knows how to make him mad. Bringing up his father makes him quickly lose focus. Blinded by rage, he charges and quickly loses the duel. Thorfinn decides to stay as a lookout on the boat for the night, where he imagines his father reminding him that he has no enemies, and to let the idea of revenge go. Askeladd's uncle's slave startles him. He tells her of a place without slaves or war, where no one would be able to find her. King Sweyn is adamant about bringing his youngest son Canute to conquer England, despite his caretaker Ragnar protesting. There's only one problem. Capturing London Bridge. Askeladd and his crew arrive to help take London. Bjorn asks him what his plan is. He doesn't really have one. His only idea is to send Thorfinn to kill Thorkel, a Dane who is fighting for the English. Floki and his Vikings approach the bridge and try to offer Thorkel a better deal if he returns to their side to fight against the English. Thorkel doesn't care which side he's on, as long as his opponents are tough. He knows the English are weak and losing the war, so fighting against them wouldn't be any fun. He throws a giant boulder at Floki's ship, laughing as they retreat. The Danes attempt to cut through the support beams until Thorkel begins throwing logs, taking out whole ships by himself. Then Thorfinn shows up, jumping off the mast of Askeladd's ship onto the bridge. Thorfinn dodges, cutting Thorkel's wrist. Assessing his weak points, Thorfinn goes low, kicking the back of his knee. Thorkel is wide open, but he uses his hand to stop Thorfinn's blade and begins to throw Thorfinn around. Askeladd receives the signal to retreat. Thorfinn plays dead until he gets his chance to strike, cutting off the tips of Thorkel's ring and pinky finger on his right hand, the same one he stabbed. Thorkel asks his name before Thorfinn jumps into the water to escape, surprised to find out that he is the son of Thor's, obviously recognizing the name. King Sweyn decides to move on from London, leaving only 4,000 men under the control of his son Canute, who has no experience in battle. Thorfinn makes his way to the riverbank with a dislocated shoulder, a sprained ankle, and a few broken ribs. Seeing the Danes retreat, Thorkel's men believe they've won, to his dismay, angrily challenging them to come back and fight. Askeladd assumes Thorfinn is dead, but to his surprise, he limps out of the forest, finding the rest of the men. They continue on towards Wessex in search of riches to last the winter. Thorkel hurls boulders at the prince's men in frustration since they refuse to attack. Upon finding out the Prince of Denmark was there, his face lit up, grinning ear to ear. Thorfinn has another dream about his family in a bright, warm field. His father tells him to forget about revenge again. The dream quickly turns into a nightmare. Thorfinn wakes up screaming, wondering where that warm place with rolling hills and open fields is. Unable to sleep, he walks up a hill to find some ruins. The men are getting restless, looting poor villages and being separated from the army. A fight breaks out amongst the men, leading to a duel to death. Askeladd sits amongst the ruins on the top of the hill, unable to sleep like Thorfinn, who makes it clear they are not friends when Askeladd tries to start a conversation. Askeladd tells him about the Romans, who conquered England and left the ruins there 500 years ago before the Saxons came. Now the Danes are conquering the Saxons. Askeladd summons him to inform him that the army has moved north, leaving Canute in the south. According to the messenger, Thorkel defeated the army in London and is headed north with 500 of his closest followers to catch up to the main forces. The messenger tells them that Thorkel captured Prince Canute, saying he's going to ask for reinforcements while Bjorn and the crew look to Askeladd on how to proceed. In an unexpected turn of events, Askeladd beheads the messenger. He rallies his crew by announcing that they will save the prince without any backup and claim the reward for themselves. Thorkel's forces march as the leaves begin to fall. Winter is on its way. Ragnar argues with Thorkel, and suddenly the priest begins to panic, saying he sees God. Ragnar tells the men to get him some booze. They debate which religion's gods are better, asking the priest, Canute's teacher. He responds, whichever one created booze, to the amusement of the men. The men stop. Thorkel throws a spear. It's a hit, straight through one of the soldiers lying in wait. The ambushers boast they have 2,000 men, so they should hand over the prince and give up. Thorkel agrees to let Ragnar, the priest, and Canute go, but starts egging the king's forces on. Throwing insult after insult, the men become enraged and refuse to allow them to go unanswered. They charge. Not far from the skirmish, Askeladd and his men wait for them to start fighting. As soon as they hear the sounds of battle, they start emptying barrels of oil and set the forest on fire, creating a circle of flames to trap and confuse both sides. Askeladd calls for Thorfinn to be covered in water and sent through the blaze on horseback to retrieve the prince. Thorkel's men surround Ragnar and the prince when a burning horse flies between them. Thorfinn jumps off, claiming he's there to save the prince, ignoring Ragnar's skepticism. When Thorfinn is about to cut down Thorkel's men, he shows up, happy to see Thorfinn. He waves and asks him a few questions. If his father's name is really Thor's, he guesses his mother's name is Helga. Thorfinn is taken by surprise when he continues to praise his father, a true warrior. The flames spread, separating them from Thorfinn and the prince's entourage, who rendezvoused with Askeladd's crew. Ragnar has no choice but to thank them and rest the prince's safety in their hands. Askeladd has only one request: to see Knut's face. Everybody gasps when the prince removes his helmet, saying he looks more like a princess than a prince. Askeladd finds an old man fishing, claiming he's a ferryman since the fish are already hibernating. He notes that Askeladd's English accent sounds like someone from his country. He notices Askeladd's armor while he requests a message to be sent across the water to one of the elders. The boatman seems to understand and accepts the request. The ear, one of Askeladd's crew members who has exceptional hearing, says he hears soldiers and horses about one day's march behind them. Thorkel's men are catching up quick. Suddenly, the ear hears scouts on the hill. Their position is compromised, but Askeladd is confident that they will escape their pursuers, despite Ragnar's protest. During the night, Bjorn approaches Askeladd about the men's worry, noticing a change in his demeanor ever since he saw the prince's face. Askeladd explains how he's been living with criminals for 40 years and can tell a lot by looking at someone's face. He says the prince doesn't have the face of a king. Back on the road, the ear warns the crew that Thorkel's men are right on their heels, but Askeladd isn't worried. Their reinforcements are waiting for them with a ship. Carrying them across the Severn River to Wales, a harsh, infertile land divided into different kingdoms after the fall of the Roman Empire, they escape pursuit for now. Askeladd claims that Wales is his ally, and if Ragnar is so concerned, then Thorfinn will be their personal bodyguard, promising a duel as a reward when they reach Gainsborough. Gratianus, a commander and friend of Askeladd, tells them he's only helping them if the prince is willing to sign a pact of non-aggression with Wales, after conquering England, of course. Two messengers from Breheniog appear farther down the road, but the ear sends Bjorn to warn Askeladd that they are surrounded. Thorfinn perks up as well, noticing archers on the hills on either side of the road. Thorkel is still in pursuit. King Sweyn sits in front of an army of Jomsvikings, preparing for invasion in the spring. Leif Erikson arrives in England, disheartened to see a boy who looks like Thorfinn being sold as a slave, still on his decade-long search. Arrows fly from the hillside, piercing the head of Askeladd's horse, killing it and throwing him off. Standing, Thorfinn brandishes a shield, ready to protect the wagon's other passengers, Knut, Ragnar, and the drunken priest. Floki reports to King Sweyn that the main army in Wessex is winning. It's only a matter of time before the Danish army conquers the land. If all goes well, they will be victorious come winter. Floki goes on to explain how Thorkel won the Battle of London and that Knut is missing in action. Ragnar and Thorfinn prepare to protect the prince from archers back in Wales. Gratianus tries to reason with the Welsh, but their poor relations with the Danes and their invasion of England force the Welsh to put on a show to save face. Askeladd presents the meek prince, telling him to address their would-be attackers, but he's too anxious and hides behind Ragnar, who defends him. Ragnar explains how difficult life growing up in a royal family has been for Knut. The Welsh grow impatient, so Askeladd and Gratianus agree to tell the leader their plans to avoid any conflict and secure safe passage. Thorfinn is disgusted that he and the prince are the same age. The Welsh leader agrees to speak with Askeladd and Gratianus, alone, to save face and avoid risking their reputation. Askeladd asks Asser, the Welsh leader, if he would be willing to join them depending on the reward. Noticing that he offended Asser, Askeladd says he's just kidding. Bjorn becomes suspicious while the leaders talk. Despite knowing Askeladd for years, he still doesn't know that much about him, and speaking Welsh is the least surprising development. Gratianus helps explain to Asser that Askeladd is the son of Lydia, making him a descendant of the leader of the Roman Celts, a descendant of Artorius, commander of the Britannia army who fought off the invading Saxons, making Askeladd only half Dane. Due to his upbringing, he secretly hates the Danes. If Askeladd can get Knut on the throne, he will broker a deal to never march on Wales. For the first time, Thorfinn provokes Knut to speak aloud to someone other than Ragnar. Snow begins falling. It looks like winter is coming early. They plan to head to Mercia, then march to Gainsborough to meet up with the main army. The snow covers the ground in a small village, as a young girl asks God whether someone who commits an act considered sinful, no matter how small, is welcome in heaven. Two brothers from Askeladd's men tell Willibald, the priest, about Thor's and how he said, "A true warrior doesn't need a sword." Eyes wide, he repeats the phrase to himself all night, having a profound revelation in his search for what love really is. Askeladd decides to raid the village where the girl was praying in the snow, much to Ragnar's dismay. He does not want to make enemies of Mercia. The little girl and her family sit down for dinner, where she questions God's judgment and plan. She leaves to find the ring that she stole from the market hidden in a tree, fearing God's wrath and being separated from her family in the afterlife. That's when she sees them, the Danes at her front door. The priest tries to warn the town but is quickly silenced. The pillaging begins, throwing the village into a panic. They gather all the villagers. There isn't enough food for everyone, and with the chance of being discovered by the enemy, they slaughter the village, executing them all before burying them in a mass grave. The girl survives, escaping into the night. She addresses God, not with anger or animosity though. She feels elated, free. Floki tells King Sweyn about the battle where Canute went missing. The king blames his son's weakness and inferiority to his brother Harold as the reason for being taken. When Thorkel's second-in-command relays the news that King Sweyn is winning the war and that continuing to fight against him is a death sentence, he decides to change sides, again. Back in Mercia, the priest questions God's love, expressing his doubts. Canute snaps at him, asking him how dare he question God's love. The girl who escaped tells Thorkel's men about the slaughter of her village, and they prepare to march on them. The ear warns Askeladd and his men of the incoming troops. Ragnar invites Thorfinn to join him and the prince for dinner, using the rabbit he caught for the stew that Canute is making. Surprised that he can cook, as princes were not permitted to learn how to cook. It was the job of a slave. Two of Askeladd's men burst through the door, reporting that the English have arrived. Ragnar follows them to give Askeladd a piece of his mind, realizing that the sounds of battle are coming from a different direction. It's too late. A spear pierces Ragnar's chest from behind as soon as he draws his sword. Demanding to speak with Askeladd before he dies, Ragnar reveals that Canute's real enemy is his father, King Sweyn, not the English. Canute is devastated upon seeing Ragnar's corpse. Askeladd leaves Thorfinn in charge of Canute to go question the English captain. Before they can get any information out of the captain, Thorkel and his men arrive. Some of Askeladd's crew defect and try to join Thorkel. Instead of being welcomed, their surrender only makes Thorkel more confident. They must be scared. Askeladd orders his men to destroy a bridge that crosses a shallow river, despite their protest. It's a waste of time in their eyes, and only makes them question his leadership even more. Thorkel shows up after Askeladd orders Bjorn and Thorfinn to take the prince and gain some distance in a sled. The men's morale continues to drain after Thorkel throws a spear, skewering 4 men at once. Askeladd's traitorous men surround the sled with the prince on board in an attempt to capture Canute and win favor with Thorkel by handing him over. Lydia tells young Askeladd about Avalon, a land where King Artorius, their ancestor, waits in paradise to return one day to liberate his land, asking her son to become his sword. Back in Mercia, Askeladd addresses his men before they part, revealing that for the past decade of working together, he's actually hated them the entire time. He begins attacking his own men while Bjorn and Thorfinn attempt to escape on a sled with the prince in tow. Instead of attacking the passengers, their pursuers slaughter a horse, causing the sled to crash. Thorfinn steals a horse to go back for Askeladd, while Bjorn takes a stand, eating a berserker mushroom and telling them to all attack at once. After finally subduing Askeladd, Thorkel catches up with them. Instead of accepting their surrender, Thorkel tells his men to kill all the rebels while sparing Askeladd. Just when Thorkel wonders where Thorfinn is, he shows up on horseback, enraged, charging at Thorkel, who begins to wind up, uppercutting the horse hard enough to stop it and its heart, sending Thorfinn flying. Landing safely, Thorfinn begins screaming at Thorkel to leave Askeladd for him. To everyone's surprise, Thorfinn isn't one of his followers, but his enemy. Thorkel agrees to duel for Askeladd's life, and they both square up, preparing to duel with a crowd of rowdy Vikings as witnesses. Thorfinn rushes him. If he can see his attacks, he can dodge. He lands a hit. No good. Thorkel is wearing chainmail under his tunic. Thorkel reveals that Thor's wasn't a descendant of noble blood like Thorfinn thought. He rose through the ranks because of his battle prowess. It was Helga, his mother, who was the daughter of a jarl, a king. If he wants to know more about his family, Thorfinn must entertain Thorkel some more, at which the Vikings begin to laugh when Thorfinn accepts the challenge. But Thorkel isn't laughing. He tells the men he considers Thorfinn to be a warrior, and they shouldn't be laughing. They should take Thorfinn as seriously as he does. Askeladd wonders what happened to the prince. Canute lies in the snow, wishing it was all over, when he sees a vision of Ragnar. He apologizes to Canute for raising him like a regular kid, against the Jarl's wishes, but Canute thanks him. It's time he stops dreaming. It's time to wake up. Canute wakes up to find Bjorn going berserk, killing everyone in his path. The priest is glad he isn't hurt, but tells him Ragnar didn't love him, that watching 62 men being murdered for the prince's safety isn't true love. Thorfinn lands a few hits on Thorkel, who asks him what makes a true warrior, causing him to have a flashback to when his father told him the answer to the same question. Canute asks the priest what true love is. He tells the prince that the feelings Ragnar felt were not true love, but discrimination. True love is found in death. In the cycle of life, nature, and our return to nature in death is love. Thorkel sends Thorfinn flying with a kick, causing Askeladd to lose any hope of survival. Bjorn turns his blind rage towards the prince. The priest says he's insane, but Canute says everyone is the same. No one is sane. Canute calms Bjorn down. Rejecting God and vowing to create a paradise on earth, he will give meaning to their battles, to their lives and deaths. Thorkel approaches Thorfinn, who comes only to find his arm broken, leaving him unable to fight. Askeladd walks over and demands Thorfinn allow him to help, while Thorkel sits down and promises to tell Thorfinn about his father, Thors. Before Thors defected and took his family to Iceland, he and Thorkel were commanders of the Vikings. After the Battle of Jörungavágr in 987 AD, Thorkel believed he had perished. Until 3 months after Thor's funeral, he caught Thors and Helga trying to leave in the night with Thorfinn's infant sister Ilda. It turns out that Helga is the daughter of the Viking leader and Thorkel's niece. Thorkel tries to stop Thors from leaving because it was a death sentence without the permission of the Jarl. But Thors quickly beats Thorkel without a weapon and agrees not to tell his brother, the Jarl. Thorfinn refuses to answer any of Thorkel's questions, but agrees to heed Askeladd's advice. Thorkel's weakness is his head. The duel continues, and Thorfinn feigns defeat. Just as Thorkel lets his guard down, Askeladd uses his sword to reflect the sun, temporarily blinding Thorkel. Thorfinn quickly takes advantage and kicks Thorkel in the head, knocking him out briefly, and begins to attack until Thorkel's men pry him off and attempt to kill him. This enrages Thorkel. How dare they disrespect his honor and their duel? Before anyone moves in for the kill, the prince, Canute, arrives and orders them all to stop. Whoever dies in this fight will die in vain. Admitting defeat, Thorkel orders his men to let Thorfinn go. Canute tells Thorkel that Askeladd and Thorfinn are his followers and that he's taking their sled and supplies. The prince tells Thorkel he has no value as a hostage since his father, King Sweyn, wants him dead anyway. Canute tells him he's going to Gainsborough to fight the king. Thorkel recognizes the look in Canute's eyes and admits he regrets not following Thors all those years ago, never learning what it means to be a true warrior. He agrees to help Canute fight the king and pledges loyalty to the prince. Askeladd bursts out laughing and walks over, pledging his sword to the prince, admitting he killed Ragnar. Canute tells the men, whoever wants to follow him, they can. He's going to tear King Sweyn from his throne. Floki receives the news, but refuses to believe that Thorkel would follow Canute and is completely shocked when he is proven wrong. Canute warns his new followers to be cautious and gain as much favor as possible, knowing they don't have many allies. Canute refuses to forgive God for the suffering of everyone on earth, promising to create a utopia no matter what it takes, even if he must become a demon to achieve it. Canute, Askeladd, and Thorfinn enter King Sweyn's longhouse. The king orders his son to approach, but Askeladd asks Thorfinn what he thinks. It's a trap. There are at least 20 men lying in wait. Canute orders them not to draw their swords. Whoever acts first loses. They must err on the side of caution. The king orders them to stop. Askeladd is finally able to see the king's face and hesitates before Canute snaps him out of it and tells him to kneel. They report that Ragnar died in Mercia. The king explains that usually they would celebrate his son's return, but first he wants to speak informally. Sweyn orders his son to come forward. He relays that he took the crown from his father and thought he could do great things until he put the crown on and found it had a will of its own. Canute asks if the crown ordered the king to kill him, to which he replies, the crown only orders two things, to use its power and to increase its power. The king says the crown doesn't want him and orders his men to surround the three. Sweyn tries to buy him off by giving him Cornwall, and if he refuses, he dies. Askeladd reacts before the soldiers attack, asking to address the king. He reasons that, since Canute won over Thorkel, London will surrender without any losses, but if he kills Canute, it will only serve to cause mistrust among the ranks. The king muses that he must be the child of a slave, since Askeladd, the one covered in ashes, is only a nickname, as his father never named him. Thorfinn is stunned looking at Askeladd. This is the only time he's ever seen him mad. But the king concedes, agreeing that in this circumstance he should be rewarding his son, not punishing him. Thorkel and his men party to boost morale at Canute's request. Everyone cheers as a small blonde man finishes his 57th drink. Surprised, Thorkel asks who he is. Willibald responds by asking if he's already forgotten. The crowd is shocked upon hearing his name. Nobody recognizes the alcoholic priest now that he's shaved his beard and cut his hair. Discovering he's only 23, they all cheer and continue the festivities. Askeladd confesses to Canute that it will be difficult to kill the king now, knowing what type of man he is, and that they should wait for the right moment. An erratic, overly enthusiastic man, calling himself Gunnar, approaches them and starts kissing up to the prince. It turns out he's Ragnar's brother. He wishes to speak to the prince about a secret plan with him and Ragnar, but finds out about his brother's death. Canute orders him to watch the king. Askeladd doesn't trust him. Two brothers, Askeladd's old followers, approach him to apologize, and he sends them away with gold, making them promise to never pick up a sword again. Somewhere else, Leif is still searching for Thorfinn after 11 years. In 1014 AD, York was controlled by King Sweyn and used as a base for Vikings to trade slaves all throughout Europe. Leif sits in his ship when someone yells at him to move it, since the first ships of the noblemen are about to land. Leif recognizes Askeladd immediately as the man who killed Thors. Askeladd muses about the meeting and how they should proceed, saying they should expose the secret. Canute turns to ask what he means, and Askeladd smugly tells him he's going to die, here and now. A hooded man loads a crossbow bolt and fires from the shore, hitting Canute. Askeladd creates panic by yelling that the prince has been shot. When the assassin turns to flee, his path is blocked by Thorfinn, who tackles him to the dock below, killing him in front of Leif. The guards close in and accuse Thorfinn of being the killer. Leif steps forward to confirm it's really him after all these years. The men try to save the prince, only to find out that it's really a slave girl who is used as a double. Askeladd loudly explains that the prince was right to be cautious, since there were obviously people in York who were trying to kill him, angering Floki even more. Thorfinn explains what's been happening over the last 11 years, and how he's still seeking revenge. He asks Leif about Vinland, but he asks him to come home to his family instead. Thorfinn becomes angry, telling Leif that nothing will ever be enough until he kills Askeladd. Askeladd visits Bjorn. He doesn't have much time left. They both agree on something for tomorrow, after Bjorn asks about Askeladd's leg, replying that he's still able to hold a sword. All over town, rumors about the attempted assassination of the prince start to spread. Askeladd admits to setting up the assassination and trying to tie the king's hands. The prince agrees it's a good plan, but asks him never to use a double again. Thorkel is also impressed by his scheme. Gunnar, still overly enthusiastic, agrees, but leaves immediately. Askeladd tells Canute not to trust him and has Thorfinn follow him. Gunnar goes straight to the king's house, confirming their suspicions. Thorfinn wants to duel Askeladd before the Imperial Council and his arm heals. The prince agrees to be the witness, but on the condition that it ends when he says it does. A half-dead Bjorn limps towards them, apologizing to Thorfinn that their duel will have to wait until his and Askeladd's is over. Bjorn expresses that his only desire was to be friends, despite Askeladd's disdain for the Danes. Askeladd admits he is his only friend, his best friend, before sending Bjorn to Valhalla. Askeladd somberly tells Thorfinn to come at him. Askeladd throws his sword, provoking Thorfinn to attack. It only angers him, and he lets his guard down while rushing Askeladd, who effortlessly stops him in his tracks. Thorfinn had already lost before the duel even began. Thorkel notes that they must have dueled countless times just by the way each of them fought, wondering the reason for so many duels. Askeladd continues to beat Thorfinn senseless with his bare hands. The prince stops him before he follows through with his sword. The prince wakes up Thorfinn, telling him the duel is over and that he lost. Askeladd sits down and begins to explain why Thorfinn never wins. His rage blinds him, giving away all of his tells. Bjorn was right. Askeladd hates warriors, especially Viking warriors. The first man he ever killed was a Norse warrior, his father. He goes on to tell him how to kill someone you hate. His mother was a slave who was too sick to work, so he worked at the blacksmith's cleaning up as a child. He was always covered in ash, which garnered him his nickname. His father Olaf was a powerful man who loved killing, but only named his legitimate sons. Once his mother fell ill, Olaf threw her away, despite being one of his favorite slaves. His mother believed in the legend of Artorius, their ancestor, who she claimed lived far to the west in a paradise called Avalon, believing he would return one day to conquer the world. 500 years later, Artorius still hasn't returned. Askeladd's mother finally snapped when he was 11. She thought his father was the hero come back to save them, but he drew his sword. Realizing the legend wasn't true, Askeladd drew a sword for the first time and defended his mother. It was the first time Olaf recognized Askeladd as his own son. Seeing his potential, he invited Askeladd to live with him and his half-brothers. After 2 years of waiting, Askeladd killed his father in his sleep, and the blame fell on one of his brothers. Askeladd calls Thorfinn an idiot for not being able to kill him after 10 years. A useful idiot, but an idiot all the same. The nobles make their way to the Imperial Council, speaking amongst themselves and trying to decide how to handle the rumors about Sweyn wanting his own son dead. Outside, Thorfinn thinks he sees Askeladd, but realizes he's mistaken after catching up to the stranger. Thorfinn is thrown in jail after beating up the group that the man was with. King Sweyn addresses the council, pretending to be glad about his son's return. He awards Canute Mercia and asks Thorkel to watch over him. Askeladd believes he has won until the king proclaims his plans to attack Wales in the coming spring. Floki notices the look of shock on Askeladd's face. Leif visits Thorfinn in jail, trying to convince him to come home to his mother and sister. Leif explains how he swore on his honor that he would find Thorfinn and bring him home. Leif tries to use the promise of freedom that Vinland can offer, a place without slaves, where everyone lives in peace. Thorkel asks Askeladd how he was able to evade him by traveling through Wales. Askeladd explains that his mother's grave is there, and that Wales is his true homeland. Sweyn addresses Askeladd directly, telling him to come and kneel before the king. The king awards Askeladd with 50 pounds of silver for helping save his son Canute, and after Floki informs Sweyn of Askeladd's reaction to the planned invasion of Wales, the king says he has high expectations for him in their conquest of his homeland. Unable to remain silent, Askeladd challenges the king's decision to subjugate Wales. The king asks him to explain his reasoning. Askeladd goes on to reason that after 10 years of war in England, they should be focusing on the recovery of both the people and the land. He also argues that because the terrain is harsh and infertile in Wales, it simply isn't worth the cost. Sweyn pretends to be gracious for Askeladd's advice, while closing the distance between them. As soon as he is close enough, the king gives Askeladd an ultimatum. Give him Canute's head and join him, or else he will invade Wales, admitting he couldn't care less about the country. Sweyn has someone looking into Askeladd's past. He knows that his mother was a slave, the only thing Wales exports. When Leif frees Thorfinn from jail, they head to his boat. Thorfinn is finally old enough to sail. Leif turns away for a moment, and Thorfinn is already gone. Instead of playing along, Askeladd begins insulting the king, calling him an ugly old man unfit to wear the crown. He's not what a king looks like. Sweyn's guards draw their swords, but Askeladd is already within reach. Drawing his sword, he threatens the king's life if anyone makes a move. Canute warns Thorkel not to get involved since Askeladd isn't acting like himself, while King Sweyn promises to forgive him if he puts his sword away. But Askeladd refuses. Sweyn deserves to die after mocking his family and people. He reiterates that Askeladd is merely a nickname. The name his mother gave him is Lucius Artorius Castus, claiming he is the legitimate heir to the Kingdom of Britannia. Floki attempts to distract him by throwing a goblet. It's too late though. He decapitates Sweyn in a single blow. With that, Askeladd claims to feel better now. Floki orders his men to attack, while Canute does the same, branding Askeladd as a traitor and criminal for committing regicide. Thorfinn hears swords clashing while making his way to the longhouse, and notices the two men guarding the doors rush inside. Confused, Thorfinn, seeing Askeladd going into a frenzy through an opening, pushes through the mob. Canute, realizing it's just an act to save both whales and himself, orders Thorkel to stand down, to which he replies, "The master must put down their dog." Thorfinn makes it through the crowd, yelling his name, but is told to stay back. Before Thorfinn can reach Askeladd, Canute pierces his heart with a sword. Askeladd offers Thorfinn his life, but he won't accept it. Not like this. Askeladd tells him to go. Leave. Go further than Thor's did. That is his true fight. He never thought about the future after finally getting revenge. Canute addresses Thorfinn, knowing he won't forgive him, and tells him to go wherever he wants. Turning to face him, Thorfinn is broken over Askeladd's death and lunges at the prince, cutting his face while Thorkel subdues him. Canute puts Floki in his place, while the prince takes up the crown and declares himself king. While the guards drag Thorfinn out, he finally lets go of his father's dagger. His whole life flashes in the reflection of the blade before it hits the ground. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.